So hi, this is Marty Bean of Be the Runner, and I'm making a little video to talk to you about the history of distance running in the U.S. And just so you know a few ins and outs, a few of the historic names, some of the current runners and so on. So, you know, you may be hanging out after a race and talking about running. You may be at a cocktail party and people say, hey, that person runs, you know, I want to ask them about the history of distance running in the U.S. or have you ever heard of this guy or so on. So here's your little lesson. So it's pretty cool actually. So you know, if you look back at distance running in the world, really, back in the 50s, there was this big push for men to try to break 4 minutes in the mile, which of course was done in 1955 by Roger Bannister of England. And he was actually a med student at the time. So, you know, imagine that, the guy studying medicine and still training hard enough to be able to be the first person ever to break the 4-minute mile. In the U.S., we had several very strong runners at that time, and definitely into the 60s. You may have heard of Jim Ryan. He's a guy that was really head and shoulders of other American middle distance runners. Literally, he's a very tall guy, actually, which is a little bit unusual, but he held the American record in the mile for a long, long time, and because he was so far ahead of everyone. But you know, those kind of things, those kind of feats were really viewed by people as being something that a superhuman would do. It wasn't something that a normal person could do. So really for men, and by the way, I do want to separate men's distance running history in the U.S. from women's distance running in the U.S. because it is very different. They have a very different history. So for men, probably the key moment, and you know, to a certain extent for women too, a key moment for distance running in the U.S. was in 1972 at the Olympics in Munich. And the reason that that's significant is a guy named Frank Shorter won the Olympic marathon in 1972 in Munich. And the reason that was significant is that was on TV. People were able to watch that on TV. They watched that race. And what happened was people looked at that and they thought, gosh, that guy's just jogging. Of course, he was going very fast, maybe just a little bit over 5 minutes a mile for 26.2 miles. So it was extraordinary that he was able to do that, that anyone is able to do that. But people saw it on TV and it looked like he was jogging. So people in the U.S., they thought, gosh, that's something I could do. I want to go down and get some shoes, some running shoes, and I'm going to take up running. So that was great, and so a lot of people sort of took it up at that time. Then in 1976, Frank Shorter was the favorite to win the marathon, the Olympic marathon in Montreal. And unfortunately, it didn't work out for him. He did get the silver medal. So he was, you know, again, on TV. Here's a guy, looks like he's jogging, and gosh, he gets a silver medal. Now he's got a gold medal and a silver medal for a guy who's jogging, so people thought. But those two events were very significant because people saw that and they thought, I want to do that too. I can do that too. So people really took up running. That was one of the big running booms at the time. There were some other books. You know, a guy named Jim Fix wrote a book about running for just regular people like us. And that became very popular. And people really got into fitness at that time. So that was great. In the late 70s, there also in the early 80s, a guy named Bill Rogers from Boston. He would win the Boston Marathon just about every year, and he was a fantastic runner as well. He would have been in the Olympics probably, but the timing never quite worked out for him, but definitely one of the best U.S. Men distance runners of all time. So those are two names that kind of go hand in hand, Frank Shorter and Bill Rogers. So keep those names handy. Now, if you look at what was going on with women, so of course women were actively involved in track and field from the very beginning. There have been many famous women in track and field, but not so much in the distances because there was a feeling that women shouldn't be running very far. We think of it as kind of a strange thing now, but that was sort of the conventional wisdom at the time. So it wasn't, you know, until 1967. A woman named Catherine Switzer entered the Boston Marathon. Now at that time, women were not even allowed to enter road races. So what she did, she actually entered by putting her name down the way she always signed her name, which was KV Switzer. She just used her initials, and of course there was no box to check male or female because only men ran road races. Well, so she got her number and everything, and so she went to run the race, and she brought along her boyfriend at the time, and he was a guy who had played some college football. It's a great big guy. So here she is, she's running along in the race, and word got out to the race organizer. And so he was actually, this is a guy that was actually riding on the press truck. So they kind of circled back from the front of the race back to where she was. And because it was on the press truck, this whole thing was on camera. It was recorded on camera, and it's a striking series of events. Anyway, this guy gets down, and he starts running alongside her, and he's yelling at her to get out of his race. And yelling at her didn't work. She says, well, I'm just going to keep running. And so he grabbed her and tried to pull her off the race. Well, that was a mistake because the boyfriend gave the guy a shoulder like it was like he was a linebacker and this was some hapless, skinny little wide receiver. And the guy went flying off the course. And she was able to finish the race. And I think it took her a little under 4.5 hours. So that's very typical of runners today, of the kind of effort. She actually was a very good runner, and she ran much, much faster in subsequent Boston marathons. But that was a big moment for women in road racing, to be able to even run it. Our own race, Beta Breakers, has a very long history, and it wasn't until 1971 that women were officially allowed to run, and a woman that I actually sort of know, because I know her husband fairly well. I used to run with her husband. A woman named Fran Conley was the first winner of Beta Breakers, but not until 1971. So, a much later history for women than for men in the U.S. in distance running. So even so those things were going on for sort of people's races, so to speak. But people realize, oh, sure, women can do this, of course. But it wasn't until 1984 that the Olympics even included a women's marathon. And I actually was fortunate enough to go down to LA to watch the Olympics in 1984. And I went out on the road and I got to watch the women's Olympic marathon. And, the U.S. has often been ahead of other countries in women's sports. And sure enough, it was an American woman who won that first Olympic marathon. Joan Benoit, who later became Joan Benoit Samuelson. She was not the kind of runner that took advantage of the fact that there weren't very many women running, so maybe she didn't run. No, she ran really, really fast time. I think she may have even been under 2 hours and 20 minutes. And in fact, her world best in the marathon stood for a long, long time. And for the longest time, she had one of the top 5 times ever in the history of women's marathoning. So she was way ahead of her time. And I remember watching that race, and she was so far ahead of the second place woman that it was kind of a joke. But she was a fantastic, fantastic athlete. She actually, I think she does compete a little bit now as an older athlete. But it was very exciting, and it was a big step in the right direction for women's running, especially here in the U.S. So, those are really the key things. So the Frank Shorter, Bill Rogers thing going on in the late 70s, early 80s, and definitely Joni Benoit in 84. And that in the 70s and 80s, people really got into running. That's when Nike got started making running shoes, and followed by several other companies, of course. And that's become a big business. And we have many, many runners. It's hard to get into a lot of races these days, which is pretty exciting for the sport. So, another thing that I want to, share with you. So, this is the kind of thing, people may come up to you because they know you're a runner, and they say, they may ask you questions about running, about current running. So, current runners in the U.S. right now, we have some really, really good runners in the U.S. right now. It's very exciting for distance running right now in the U.S. We did very well at the 2012 Olympics. In the marathon, so people often look to the marathon. So we had a guy in there, his name's Meb Keflezighi, And he was actually one of the favorites to possibly win. He ended up coming in 4th place, which is really outstanding. Unfortunately, it's a bad place to be because it's the first place that you don't get a medal. But he's a fantastic runner, and people are very, very excited when they see him in a race. He's a great runner, so he's really super. So another guy that did extraordinarily well in the 2012 Olympics in a distance race was a guy named Galen Rupp, who was a runner from University of Oregon, and he ended up coming in 2nd place in the 10,000 meters, and that was fantastic. I think he lost by only about a half second. So he just missed the gold medal, got the silver medal. That's a really extraordinary thing, and he's a terrific runner. You see him all the time in the top results of some of the top races around the world. Some other guys, Bernard Lagat. He's a guy. He came in 4th place, another 4th place for the U.S. in the 5,000 meters. And it had been a long time since we had an American that was even competing very well in the 5,000, but now he is, and there are a lot of guys right behind him that are coming up. Our women are doing just fantastic work in the distances. Two women in particular, Shalane Flanagan and Kara Goucher. They both ran in Beijing in the 2008 Olympics, and in fact both of those women ran both the 5,000 and the 10,000, and they were finishing, let's see, I'm going to check my notes here. Let's see, Shalane Flanagan, she was 10th in the 5,000, and Kara Goucher was actually 9th in the 5,000, so they were 9th, 10th. In the 10,000 in 2008, Shalane Flanagan actually got the bronze medal. So that is really a big step for women's distance running in the U.S. Kara Goucher was 10th in that race in the 10,000 in 2008. They both ran the marathon. They moved in distance to the marathon in 2012, and they came in 10th and 11th place. So that was one of the best finishes by U.S. runners in the same Olympic marathon. So that was very exciting, and definitely good things to come from them. They're still definitely young enough that they can improve even more. So by 2016, they have a really good shot at doing that. The good thing about that kind of thing, when you have women that are performing so well on an international level like that, is they have a lot of young people. They see that and they want to be like them. So definitely, distance running in the U.S. for both men and women is really on the upswing right now. So that's very exciting from a spectator's perspective. Okay, so another thing people want to know, and they may come ask you because you're the runner in the group, is how fast, what is the world record for the marathon? So one thing about marathon, road races is that they don't really call them records, they call them bests, because the reason is that different courses have different features. Some have hills, some don't. Some even are a net downhill, some are a net uphill. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison. So they call them world bests. So right now, the world best in the marathon for men, it's held by a guy from Kenya named Dennis Kimeto, and he just set this right about the end of September, and it was just a hair under 2 hours and 3 minutes. So that's just extraordinary if you think about what goes into that. I'm pretty sure that's under 5 minutes a mile. The women's record has stood actually now for over 11 years, and that's held by a woman named Paula Radcliffe. And believe it or not, she ran a time of 2 hours and 15 minutes, which is just unbelievable. Nobody's really coming very close to that lately. It's going to be a while before that record's broken. She actually, so those are the current world bests in the marathon. So actually, if you look at the 10,000 meter record, so for a 10K, for a road 10K, the world best is for women is actually held by the same woman, Paula Radcliffe, and she ran a 10K in just under 30 and a half minutes. Just if you think about that, that's just amazing that somebody could run that fast. And the men's world best, which was set about 4 years ago, is about 26:44 is the current world best. And that was set about 4 years ago for a 10K road race. For a half marathon, so you're probably interested in what are the best runners in the world do a half marathon in. For the men, they're down now where they have run under an hour. They're about 58.5 minutes is the world best right now. The women are not that far behind. The best time ever for a women's half marathon is just a little bit over an hour and 5 minutes. So, think about that. Most of us are running way slower than that. They have time to go and take a shower and, eat dinner or whatever before we come in. But it's pretty cool to know these things because, when you go and do your own race, and then it helps to appreciate what some of these runners are doing. So one final thing that I wanted to talk about was that I think is really cool about distance running is how accessible a lot of these stars of distance running are. As an example, I mentioned in the very beginning, I mentioned a guy named Jim Ryan. Well, he actually appeared at a race I ran, and he was promoting some things. He has a hearing issue. I don't know how much he can actually hear, but he was promoting some hearing aids that he was helping market. But he was just at this desk, and I was able to go up and talk to him. Super nice guy, it's not like he's hanging around with a bunch of bodyguards or anything. People could just walk right up and talk to him. Same thing several years ago now. It's probably been 15 years ago, maybe longer. Frank Shorter and Bill Rogers, who I talked about earlier, they were spokesmen for Alamo Rent-A-Car, and Alamo Rent-A-Car did a series of races all around the country. They were these 5-mile races, and they went around and they would run in the race themselves, and but then after the race, here they were, my two distance running heroes from when I was really getting interested in distance running. And here they were just hanging out with all the other runners, talking about the same things that runners talk about at the end of races. Oh yeah, I ran pretty fast, but my leg was hurting a little bit in mile 3 or whatever it happened to be. So I thought that was pretty cool. One of the races I like to run every year is the Beta Breakers race, which is in May. It's usually the third Sunday in May. And the last several years, I've been able to qualify to start near the front. And so, of course, the Beta Breakers attracts some of the world's best runners. Runners from the U.S., here in the U.S., and as well as from Africa. There are usually some Kenyan and Ethiopian runners in that race. And one of the neat things is that we actually get a warm-up area for those of us near the front. And this last year, and several of the past years too, they actually have these world-class runners warming up in the same area. So here, I'm doing the same warm-ups that we do before our Sunday runs and everything that I've been teaching you. And I'm out there doing mine, and here are these world-class runners from Kenya and Ethiopia and the U.S., and they're all doing the same things I'm doing. They're just warming up for their race. And it's pretty cool, and people, like I say, it's very accessible. If you want to go up to somebody and say, hey, I saw you on that marathon on TV, they'd be very flattered that you took the time to come over and talk to them. So it's a neat thing about our sport, and one of the things that I really love about it. So anyway, there's your history of U.S. distance running in a nutshell. Those are there's a ton more detail. There's a ton more things that are interesting and fun to learn about. But those are some things that'll get you through the next brunch or the next cocktail party when people come up to you and ask you questions about distance running in the U.S. So hope you enjoyed the little video here. I hope to see you on Sunday, this coming Sunday, which is November 30th. We're going to be in Hercules. I sent the email out. I'll send another email out probably on Friday morning just to make sure I catch everybody. And I will hopefully see you in Pinole next week. Talk to you soon. Bye.